blockade of the Strait of Hormuz.
And U.S. forces have intercepted 3 Iranian oil tankers in Asian waters. They're trying to round up that so-called ghost fleet.
Lucas Thompson.
The Indian Ocean, somewhere between the coast of southern India and the open sea. April 2026, 3 o'clock in the morning, a massive oil tanker is cutting silently through dark water. No distress signal, no public tracking, no lights that were not absolutely necessary. The crew knew exactly what they were doing and exactly why they needed to stay invisible. But someone was already watching. High above the Indian Ocean, U.S. surveillance assets had been tracking this vessel for days. Not just this one, 3 of them. 3 Iranian-flagged supertankers, each carrying millions of barrels of crude oil, quietly slipping through Asian waters while the world's attention was fixed on the Strait of Hormuz. They thought they had found a way around the blockade. They were wrong. To understand what happened next, you have to understand what was at stake and why this moment was about far more than 3 ships. It had been nearly 2 months since the United States and Israel launched military operations against Iran. The conflict had triggered one of the most significant geopolitical crises in decades. Iran responded by doing what it had long threatened, closing the Strait of Hormuz. That narrow choke point between Iran and Oman is the single most important shipping lane on Earth. Roughly 20% of the world's oil and liquefied natural gas passes through it in peacetime. When Iran shut it down, global energy markets went into shock. The United States answered with a naval blockade. U.S. forces took control of what ships could enter or exit through the strait. By late April 2026, American naval forces had already directed 31 vessels to turn around. The blockade was working, or so it appeared, but Iran had a backup plan, the Ghost Fleet. 4 years, long before the 2026 conflict, Iran had been building and maintaining a shadow network of tankers. These vessels operated outside the normal tracking systems. They turned off their AIS transponders, the devices that broadcast a ship's location and identity to the world. They transferred oil at sea between ships in remote waters. They used falsified paperwork. They sailed under flags of convenience. They moved oil to buyers, primarily in Asia, while staying entirely off the official record. During the Biden administration, this fleet had operated with remarkable freedom. Sanctions existed on paper, but enforcement was inconsistent. Iran pumped oil, sold it, collected revenue, and funneled that money into its military programs. The Ghost Fleet was not a secret. Analysts and journalists had tracked it for years, but it had never faced a serious, coordinated effort to stop it. That changed in April 2026. U.S. intelligence had been studying the Ghost Fleet's patterns for months. They understood the routes. They understood the timing. They understood how Iran moved oil from the Karg Island export terminal, Iran's primary oil export hub, through the Persian Gulf, around the Strait, and into Asian waters where buyers were waiting. Now, with a blockade in place and a direct confrontation underway, Washington made a decision. The Ghost Fleet would no longer be tolerated anywhere. Not in the Gulf, not in the Indian Ocean, not off the coast of Malaysia, not anywhere the U.S. Navy could reach. And the U.S. Navy can reach a lot of places. The 3 tankers in question were the Dorina, the Deep Sea, and the Seven. Each one was Iranian-flagged, each one was under international sanctions, and each one was carrying a cargo worth tens of millions of dollars. The Dorina was the largest. A supertanker, fully loaded, 2 million barrels of crude oil sitting in her holds. She had been tracked off the southern coast of India, moving slowly, waiting. For what exactly was unclear, perhaps for a ship-to-ship transfer, perhaps for an escort, perhaps for a signal from someone on shore. She never got it. The Deep Sea was positioned off the coast of Malaysia. She was a supertanker as well, partially loaded, enough crude to generate significant revenue for the Iranian government. Her AIS transponder had gone dark over a week earlier. To the outside world, she did not exist. But U.S. surveillance had never lost her. The 7 was smaller, a maximum capacity of 1 million barrels, carrying 650,000 barrels at the time of interception. She too had been sitting off Malaysia's coast, her last public position recorded over a month before. Her crew had likely believed that the long silence meant safety. It did not. The operation began in the pre-dawn hours. U.S. naval assets moved into position. These were not improvisational intercepts. They were the result of days of surveillance, coordination, and planning. The U.S. military knew where each vessel was. It knew their headings, their speeds, their likely next moves. When the order came to act, the Navy was already exactly where it needed to be. The Dorina was the first to be confronted. A U.S. Navy destroyer had been shadowing her off the southern coast of India. When contact was made, the message was direct. The vessel was in violation of U.S. sanctions. It was ordered to stop, and it would be escorted away from its current position. The Dorina's crew had a choice. They made the only realistic one available to them. The destroyer moved alongside. The interception was complete. What happened in the waters off Malaysia was more complex. Both the Deep Sea and the Savin had been stationary for extended periods, unusual behavior for commercial tankers, and a strong indicator that they were waiting for instructions or a rendezvous. U.S. forces closed in. Navy personnel conducted boarding operations. In cases like this, the boarding teams assess the vessel, confirm its cargo, verify its identity, and take control. The process is precise and practiced. These are not chaotic confrontations, but they are deliberate law enforcement operations carried out by highly trained naval personnel in international waters. By the time the sun rose over the Indian Ocean, all 3 tankers were under U.S. control. The 2 million barrels aboard the Dorina, the partially loaded holds of the Deep Sea, and the 650,000 barrels of the 7, all of it was going nowhere near its intended destination. But there was a 4th interception that same week, one that illustrated just how far the U.S. was willing to extend its reach. The M/T Majestic X was a stateless vessel, meaning it flew no recognized national flag and had no legitimate registration. It had been sanctioned for transporting Iranian crude oil. U.S. forces conducted a right-of-visit boarding mission on the Majestic X in the Indo-Pacom area of responsibility, deep in the Indo-Pacific, thousands of miles from the Strait of Hormuz. U.S. Central Command confirmed the operation. The Pentagon made its position unmistakably clear. International waters are not a sanctuary for sanctioned vessels. Anywhere they operate, the U.S. Navy can follow. Earlier that same week, the U.S. had seized the Iranian-flagged container ship Tuska near the Strait of Hormuz in the northern Arabian Sea. Then came the detention of another oil tanker in the Bay of Bengal. In total, the operations represented a dramatic expansion of the blockade, from a geographic choke point at the Strait of Hormuz to a truly global maritime enforcement campaign. Senator Lindsey Graham put it plainly in a social media post during this period. The blockade was going global. The financial implications for Iran were severe. Every barrel intercepted was revenue that would not arrive. Every tanker turned back or seized was a hole in Iran's war chest. Analysts estimated that Iran was losing approximately $500 million per day due to the combination of the blockade and the broader conflict. The Ghost Fleet had been one of Iran's primary mechanisms for keeping money flowing despite sanctions, and now that mechanism was being dismantled ship by ship. Inside Iran, the pressure was showing. Reports from intelligence sources and public policy researchers described Iranian decision-making as fragmented. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, and the political leadership were not aligned. The supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, was reportedly in hiding, with communications happening through intermediaries. Decisions were being passed through notes rather than direct command. The military doctrine Iran had built over decades, a decentralized system designed to survive the removal of central leadership, was now creating chaos instead of resilience. 31 provinces with 31 different operational plans, and no one at the top able to give a unified order. When U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance traveled to Islamabad for negotiations, with Pakistan, Egypt, and Turkey all attempting to mediate, the Iranian delegation reportedly could not speak with one voice. Vance stated publicly that it became clear halfway through a 21-hour session that the people across the table were not authorized to make final decisions. They were arguing with each other in front of the American delegation. The White House's position was straightforward. It was waiting for a unified Iranian proposal. Until that arrived, the blockade would continue. The tanker seizures would continue, and Iran would keep bleeding. Meanwhile, Iran's response to the tanker interceptions was characteristically aggressive and counterproductive. On April 22nd, Iranian gunboats fired on commercial ships attempting to transit the Strait of Hormuz. Iranian IRGC forces seized 2 container ships, including the Panama-flagged MSC Francesca, claiming the vessels had violated maritime regulations. Iran fired on at least 3 other ships during the same period, with one Greek-owned vessel running aground on Iran's shores after being hit. Tehran framed these actions as retaliation, calling the U.S. interceptions acts of piracy and war crimes. But the effect on global shipping was devastating, and the damage fell primarily on neutral parties. Countries with no involvement in the conflict suddenly found their shipping companies, their cargo, and their crews caught in the crossfire. The closure of the Strait of Hormuz had already threatened the supply of 1/5 of the world's oil and gas. Iran's attacks on neutral commercial ships made the crisis worse and reduced international sympathy for Tehran's position. President Trump, for his part, escalated the rhetoric. He announced publicly that he had ordered the Navy to shoot and kill any vessel caught laying mines in the Strait of Hormuz. The Washington Post reported that U.S. military officials had informed Congress that clearing the mines Iran had deployed could take up to 6 months after any peace agreement, and that the clearance operation could not begin until the war formally ended. The closure of the strait was not a temporary inconvenience. It was a crisis with a timeline measured in months, not days. For ordinary Americans, the effects were visible at the gas pump. The national average for gasoline had climbed to just over $4 per gallon, up from $3.17 a year earlier. A Fox News poll from the period found that 60% of Americans described gas prices as a major problem for their families. Farmers, shipping companies, and small businesses were feeling the strain most acutely. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, testifying before Congress, acknowledged the pain but predicted that prices would fall once the conflict ended, noting that the crude oil futures market already anticipated lower prices ahead. The question was how long it would take to get there. Trump, when asked about the timeline for peace talks, was characteristically direct. Speaking to Fox News' Martha McCallum, he said there was no time pressure on the ceasefire, dismissing reports of a 3 to 5 day negotiation window as false. He made one additional observation that cut to the heart of the strategy. The blockade scares them even more than the bombing. They've been bombed before. The blockade, the slow economic suffocation of Iran's ability to sell its most valuable resource, was something different. And those 3 tankers sitting in Asian waters had believed they had found the way out. The Ghost Fleet was built on a simple proposition: that the ocean is vast, that tracking is imperfect, that sanctions are porous, and that if you stay quiet and move carefully, the oil will get through. For years, that proposition had been largely correct. The fleet had moved billions of dollars of oil past sanctions regimes that lacked the will or the coordination to stop it. But in April 2026, Iran ran into a blockade that was prepared to follow sanctioned vessels not just to the edge of the Gulf, but across the Indian Ocean, into Malaysian coastal waters, into the Bay of Bengal, and deep into the Indo-Pacific. The U.S. Navy did not stop at the Strait of Hormuz. It went where the ships went. The Dorina carried 2 million barrels. The Deep Sea carried a partial load. The Seven carried 650,000 barrels. Together, they represented a single day's revenue that Iran desperately needed. They had slipped past the strait. They had gone dark on the tracking systems. They had positioned themselves in waters far from the immediate conflict zone. It was not enough. Iran had built the Ghost Fleet to survive international pressure. What it had not built it to survive was an adversary willing to enforce sanctions in every ocean simultaneously, with the intelligence infrastructure to find the ships and the naval assets to intercept them. 3 tankers, 3 interceptions, millions of barrels of crude oil that would never reach its buyer. And a message delivered not in a press conference or a diplomatic communique, but in the pre-dawn waters of the Indian Ocean, that the rules of the blockade applied everywhere.